Sleet hammered the bus shelter on Robson Street like static, and Naomi Halloway pressed her palm flat against the glass to keep from sliding off the bench. She'd been a deaf nurse for 6 years now, long enough to read a room by the vibration of footsteps and the flicker of light against moving bodies. But tonight the city had gone fully silent on her, swallowed whole by the storm, and she hadn't seen the black SUV mount the curb until its headlights washed white across her knees. She didn't know yet that she'd just stepped into the middle of a war between 2 crime families, or that the man about to catch her by the wrist had spent 4 years searching for a ghost with her mother's eyes. Vancouver in February was always wet, but this was something else. This was the sky trying to drown the whole downtown core, and Naomi had pulled a double shift at St. Axed. No, at Grace Pacific Hospital, 12 hours on a trauma floor that left her hands smelling like antiseptic and her eyes burning from reading lips through surgical masks all day. She just wanted her apartment on Davy Street, her radiator, her cat. She didn't want the bus that never came, the sidewalk slick as oil, the way her boots skated out from under her the second she stepped off the curb to cross at the unmarked corner. She felt the impact before she understood it. A wall of a man, solid as a parked car, and her shoulder cracking into his chest hard enough that the breath went out of her in a single white burst of pain. His hands closed around her upper arms, not gentle, not yet reflexive, the grip of someone who'd had hands go for his throat before and learned never to wait to find out if this one would too. She couldn't hear what happened next. She felt it. The street around them changed shape, the way a room changes when too many bodies move into it at once. That subtle shift in air pressure she'd learned to read after losing her hearing to meningitis at 11. She felt more than saw the dark shapes fanning out around them in her peripheral vision. 6, maybe 7 men, all stillness and tension, the particular coiled quiet of people holding weapons. The man's hands on her arms had gone rigid. She lifted her face, rain stinging her eyes, and looked at him properly for the first time. A jaw cut sharp enough to draw blood, dark hair plastered black against his forehead, and an expression that had frozen entirely, every muscle in it gone slack with something that wasn't fear and wasn't anger, but looked strangely like grief. He was staring at the left side of her throat, just below her ear, where a thin pale line ran from an old surgery scar. The kind you got from emergency intubation when you were 3 years old and dying of a fever no one could explain. His mouth moved. She read it off his lips with the practiced ease of a lifetime. One word. Vivienne. It wasn't her name. She shook her head, tried to step back, but his hands didn't loosen. A second man came up fast at his shoulder, mouth working in quick, urgent shapes. She caught only pieces of, "Mr. Calloway, sir, we need to move. The Dragon crew is 2 blocks out." And the man holding her, the one whose lips had just shaped a dead woman's name, finally blinked like he was surfacing from underwater. His hand moved to his coat, and for one suspended second Naomi was certain, with the flat clarity of someone who has watched enough trauma come through an ER bay, that she was about to die on a street corner in the rain. Instead, he peeled off his overcoat, black wool soaked through at the shoulders, and dropped it around her like he'd done it 100 times before, like the motion was muscle memory from another decade. She read his lips again, slower this time, like he understood she needed the shape of the words clean. "You're coming with me. It isn't safe here." "I don't know you," she said. Her own voice strange in her ears, the flattened cadence of someone who'd been deaf 18 years and never quite trusted the sound of herself. "I'm not getting in a car with." He turned his wrist over, just enough that she caught the edge of a tattoo at his cuff line. 3 interlocking circles in faded black ink, and something about the way the other men's spines straightened told her this meant authority, the way a badge meant authority, the way a scalpel meant something different in a doctor's hand than in anyone else's. A car door opened behind her, black, low, idling with its hazards blinking orange against the wet asphalt. The man, Calloway, the second one had called him. Crouched slightly so he was at her eye level, an act of consideration that snagged at her, that didn't match the gun she could now see holstered under his jacket. "Vincent Dragon's people are at your apartment right now," he mouthed, carefully, deliberately, like he'd practiced saying hard things to people who needed to read them off his face. "If you go home tonight, you won't wake up tomorrow." She didn't know who Vincent Durgan was. She didn't know why a stranger with a dead woman's name caught in his throat would know where she lived. But she'd spent 6 years learning to trust the particular stillness of someone telling the truth versus the over-explaining of someone telling a lie. And this man's face had none of the tells. So when he offered his hand, scarred across 2 knuckles, rain running down the lines of his palm, she put her own inside it and let him fold her into the car. The interior was warm and smelled of leather and cedar, and the second man, younger, leaner, with restless eyes that kept checking the mirrors, slid into the front passenger seat while Calloway settled across from her, closing the privacy partition with a soft electronic hum she felt rather than heard. He didn't speak right away. He watched her face in the dim cabin light the way she imagined people watched paintings in a museum, like he was trying to find proof of something he badly wanted to be true. Then he reached into his jacket and produced, of all things, a small leather notebook and a pen, and wrote in neat, slanted handwriting, "I'm sorry, I should have asked first if you read lips or sign. Either is fine, I know both." Something in her chest loosened, just slightly. She signed back, slow, simple, "Lips is fine. Who are you?" He wrote his answer instead of signing it, like he wanted no ambiguity. "Adrian Calloway. I run an organization most people in this city are afraid of. 22 years ago, a woman named Vivian Halloway worked for my father. She kept his books, the real ones, the ones the police never saw. She had a daughter. The daughter would be about your age now." Naomi's hands had gone cold around the notebook. "Halloway is my name," she said aloud, forgetting to sign it, her voice cracking in a way she hated. "My mother died when I was 3. A house fire. I don't remember her." "She didn't die in a fire," he wrote, and underlined it once, hard enough that the pen nearly tore the paper. "That's the story my father paid the coroner to write. She found out he was selling information to the Dragons on the side, skimming both families blind, and she tried to run with you. She almost made it." The car had begun moving, gliding through wet streets toward the glittering towers of Cole Harbor, and Naomi sat very still, feeling the small scar at her throat with 2 fingers, the one she'd always been told came from a childhood fever. "The fire damaged your hearing," he wrote, "not the meningitis. I am sorry someone told you that lie your whole life. I have spent 4 years looking for proof you were alive after the records on you went cold. Tonight you walked directly into me on a street corner 3 blocks from my building. I don't believe in coincidence, Naomi. I believe your mother is still finding ways to put you exactly where you need to be." She didn't cry, not yet, though something hot and enormous was rising inside her sternum. Instead, she asked the only question that mattered to the part of her mind still working clinically, still triaging. "Why does it matter now? Why am I in danger tonight, 22 years later?" Calloway's jaw tightened. He wrote slower this time, like the words cost him something. "Because Vincent Dragon's son found out yesterday that Vivian Halloway's daughter is alive. He believes she left you something. A flash drive, a ledger, a password. Something that would let him finish destroying my family the way your mother almost finished destroying his. He sent men to your apartment 2 hours ago. They didn't find you. They will not stop looking." The car descended into an underground garage, concrete walls swallowing the storm's noise entirely, and when the elevator doors opened on the 41st floor, Naomi stepped into a penthouse so quiet she could feel it in her teeth. Thick rugs, floor-to-ceiling windows fogged with rain, a smell of cedar and old paper, like a library built inside a fortress. For 3 days she lived inside that quiet. Calloway gave her a room with a balcony she wasn't allowed to use, a tablet preloaded with a sign language interpretation app she didn't need, and a kind of careful, reverent distance that made her chest ache in a way she didn't have a name for. He came to her in the evenings and signed with her, slow and deliberate, learning her rhythms, asking about her work at the hospital, about the cat now being fed by a neighbor he'd quietly paid off, about the version of her life that had existed before tonight. She learned things about him, too. That he'd inherited the Calloway organization at 26, when his father's heart finally gave out under the weight of his own cruelty. That he kept a photograph of a woman with Naomi's exact cheekbones in his desk drawer, worn soft at the corners from years of handling. That underneath the violence required of his world, there was a man who'd spent 2 decades being told love was a liability, and had quietly, stubbornly refused to believe it. On the 4th evening, his second-in-command, a wiry man named Felix, restless eyes, restless hands, burst into the penthouse with his breathing ragged, signing fast and clumsy that the dragons had hit one of Calloway's shipments at the rail yards, that men were pinned down, that it might be a feint to draw him out. Calloway's face went hard in a way Naomi hadn't seen yet, all that careful softness folding away into something colder. "I have to go," he signed, the motion sharp with urgency. "Daniel is staying with you. He's my best. You are safer here than anywhere in this city." He pressed his palm briefly to her cheek, the same scarred knuckles from the rain, and for a moment his whole face cracked open with something unguarded, something that looked terrifyingly like a man already mourning a loss he hadn't suffered yet. Then he was gone, the elevator doors sealing shut, and the penthouse fell into a silence Naomi could feel pressing against her eardrums, even though there was nothing there to hear. Daniel introduced himself with a thin, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of smile she'd learned over years of nursing to distrust instinctively, the smile of someone performing calm. He stood near the door rather than sitting, checking his phone too often, his posture wound tight as a spring. She watched him in the reflection of the dark window glass, while pretending to read on the tablet, the way she'd learned to watch orderlies who made her uneasy on night shifts, the ones whose hands lingered too long on unconscious patients. Something about Daniel's stillness wasn't the stillness of a guard, it was the stillness of a man waiting for permission. It came at 9:40, a text he read with his shoulders dropping in something like relief, and when he looked up at her, his whole demeanor had changed, the performed calm gone, replaced by something flatter and colder. "You're not as helpless as Adrian thinks," he said. And she read the shape of his mouth perfectly, even across the room, the particular cruelty in how slowly he formed each word, like he wanted to be sure she caught every syllable. "Vincent's paying me very well to find out exactly what your mother hid. He thinks you know. I think he's right." Naomi set the tablet down carefully, the way you set down anything when you don't want your hand shaking visibly. "I don't know anything," she said. "I was 3. I don't even remember her face." "Funny thing about people who lose one sense," Daniel said, crossing the room slowly, almost lazily, like a man who'd already decided this would be easy. "Everyone always says the others get sharper. I bet you hear things in your way, feel things. I bet your mother knew that. I bet she built something into you that you don't even know is there." He reached for her wrist and Naomi let him take it, let her face arrange itself into the particular practiced terror of a woman with no other options. The same expression she'd worn for exactly 4 seconds 11 years ago, when an angry patient's husband had cornered her in a supply closet, right before her training, 2 years of Krav Maga her foster father had insisted every girl in his house learn, had taken over completely and put the man on the floor with a dislocated shoulder. Her foster father, a retired RCMP officer who'd raised 3 deaf kids and never once treated any of them like they were breakable, had drilled one lesson into her until it lived in her bones deeper than language. The moment they think you can't fight back is the moment you have the advantage. Daniel's grip tightened, twisting, and he leaned down, so close she could feel his breath against her ear, even though she couldn't hear the words he was almost certainly snarling. She let her knees buckle slightly, let her whole body go soft and frightened in his hands, drawing him in those final few inches, his guard dropping exactly the way every cornered, overconfident man's guard always dropped right before the end. Then she drove the heel of her free hand up into the soft cartilage beneath his jaw, with everything her foster father had ever taught her, and felt more than heard, the sound that came out of him. He staggered back, hand flying to his face, and Naomi didn't hesitate, didn't let the old fear creep back in. She stepped into him instead of away, sweeping his planted leg out from under him with a low, vicious kick to the side of his knee that buckled it sideways with a wet pop. He went down hard onto the marble, and she was on him before he could reorient, knee driving into his sternum, forearm locked across his throat, with exactly enough pressure to make her point without making it permanent. "My mother didn't leave a flash drive," she said, and her own voice came out strange and cold in her ears, steadier than she'd ever heard it. "She didn't leave a password. She left a story. She told it to my foster father in a letter before she died, and he read it to me every year on my birthday until I had it memorized. Every account, every routing number, every shell company she ever helped my father launder money through. I've had it in my head since I was 9 years old, Daniel. I just never understood what it was." Daniel stared up at her, blood running from his split lip, comprehension and terror arriving in his eyes at the exact same moment, the realization that the trembling deaf girl from the storm had never once actually been trembling at all. The elevator chimed before he could answer. Halloway came through the doors with his shirt torn and bloodied at the shoulder, gun already raised. Felix and 2 others fanning out behind him. And then he stopped dead, every line of his body going rigid with shock at the sight of Naomi kneeling calmly over his own captain, forearm still pressed to the man's throat, her face utterly composed. "He sold you out," Naomi signed, not bothering to look away from Daniel, her hands moving with crisp, deliberate precision. "Vincent paid him. The rail yard attack was bait to get you out of the building." Felix made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh. Halloway lowered his weapon an inch, his expression sliding from horror into something dazed and disbelieving, and beneath all of it, something that looked almost like awe. "Take him downstairs." Halloway signed at last, his hands shaking very slightly, an order Felix and another man moved instantly to obey, hauling Daniel up by his collar and dragging him weeping toward the elevator. The doors closed. The penthouse fell quiet again, but it was a different quiet now, charged and trembling at the edges. Halloway crossed the room slowly, like he was approaching. Something he didn't entirely trust wasn't a hallucination, and knelt in front of where she still sat on the floor, his bloodied hand coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that didn't match anything else about the night. "You let him think you were helpless," he signed, and she could feel the question underneath it. "I let everyone think that," she signed back. "My whole life. It's easier. People don't expect anything from a girl who can't hear them coming." His thumb traced very lightly the old scar at her throat, the one that had nothing to do with childhood fever and everything to do with the fire that had taken her mother and rewritten her entire life into a quieter key. "Your mother died protecting what she knew," he signed. "I think she'd be furious to learn you almost died the same way, for the same reason, 22 years later." "She didn't die protecting a secret," Naomi signed, something fierce and clear settling into her chest, 22 years of an unexplained absence finally taking a shape she could hold. "She died building one, and she built it inside me." Vincent Dragon has spent 2 decades hunting a ledger that's been sitting behind my ribs the whole time, and he never once thought to look there, because nobody ever thinks to look inside the girl. Everyone assumes is fragile. Halloway laughed then, low and disbelieving, and pulled her against his chest, careful of the blood still drying on his shirt, his mouth moving against her hair. In words she felt more than read. "Vincent Dragon is going to regret every decision that led him to this city." He sighed when he finally pulled back, his eyes hard and certain in a way that made something in her settle rather than fear. "And when this is finished, you are never disappearing into a quiet life again. Not from me." "Good," she signed and meant it completely. The rain still drumming faintly against the windows 41 floors above a city that had no idea its underworld had just permanently changed shape. "I was never planning to."